I got a chance to see Moana 2 ahead of release, and my feelings are kind of mixed. I didn't love this one. Here's my thoughts. Alright, before we get into this one, I want to know, what are your hype levels like for Moana 2? Are you excited to check this one out? Or if you're coming to this review and the movie's already out and you've seen it, what are your thoughts on it? As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Join the conversation. Walt Disney Animation Studios' epic animated musical Moana 2 reunites Moana and Maui 3 years later for an expansive new voyage alongside a crew of unlikely seafarers. After receiving an unexpected call from her wayfinding ancestors, Moana must journey to the far seas of Oceania and into dangerous, long-lost waters for an adventure unlike anything she's ever faced. The first Moana is one of my absolute favourite Walt Disney Animation Studios movies over the last 20 years. I would probably say it is my favourite of the last decade. And in fact, I would go as far as saying it's one of my favourite Walt Disney Animation films of all time. I think Moana is a gorgeous movie. It ticks all the boxes for me. It has an incredible story. It's got so much heart and it's got so much soul, and the characters are wonderful. The music is fantastic. So when I heard that they were doing Moana 2, I of course had a bit of excitement. I get to jump back into this incredible world again. But there was something that was holding me back from being like super hyped, super excited about this one. And I think it's important to mention this going into this review. And that is that this movie right here, Moana 2, was originally developed as a long-form limited series for Disney Plus. And only a few months ago, kind of like at the final hour, Disney announced that they were instead reworking this series into a movie. Very strange move. We've never seen anything like this on this scale before. Disney were relentless in the 90s and 2000s at kind of stitching together episodes of their television series and releasing them on VHS or DVD as like a feature film, or, you know, taking the first couple of episodes and stitching them together to make like a feature-length pilot. But this is the first time where Walt Disney Animation Studios, the core arm of Disney Animation, this isn't Disney Toon or, you know, Disney TV. This is Walt Disney Animation Studios have taken what they were developing as essentially a television series and reworked it into a movie. So naturally I was kind of a little bit hesitant going into this because these movies usually are the Walt Disney Animation Studios films are like the core classics of the studio. These are the meticulously crafted films that Disney have in production for, you know, anywhere between 3 and 5 years. They spend so much time on them, they throw so much money into them. For us to hear that at the final hour a television series was being reworked, and this was announced this February, by the way, only a matter of months ago, we heard that this series was being reworked and released theatrically, kind of raised a few alarm bells for me. Why would Disney do this? Well, I think the number one answer to this is quite obvious, it's quite simple. The Nielsen ratings came out earlier in the year, and it turned out that Moana, the first movie, a movie from 2016, was the most watched movie on any streaming platform globally. It has had a second life on streaming. So I think Disney, who are desperate for big hits at the box office and who are kind of moving their attention away from the streaming service, are really, really hoping on a big screen success. The other side of that is that a lot of studios are kind of scrambling at the moment because of the writers' strike that took a big chunk out of last year, where the writers were out of work and the whole industry essentially shut down. The studios kind of had these blank slates. So I think Disney in particular kind of looked at all these things that were being developed for streaming and decided to release them theatrically instead. Not only Moana 2, but Alien Romulus, which came out early in the year, was also originally planned for the streaming service. I think it might have been a Hulu production, just as Prey was, the Predator film from a couple of years ago. And I kind of think that the hesitations that I had, the kind of worries that I had going into this movie, all sort of came to fruition. My biggest concern about this movie is that it does feel like a television film. It feels like one of those like direct-to-video sequels that Disney were pumping out in the 1990s and the 2000s. It really feels like one of these kind of lower budget installments where they cut corners on, you know, a lot of those old direct-to-video movies, the sequels. They didn't get back the original cast members, or they brought back original cast members in sort of smaller roles. They didn't have the original musicians, songwriters on board. They had kind of more television-centric directors and writers on board, not like theatrical, cinematic level craftsmen who would charge more money, lower budget, and just kind of a shell of the movie that they were sequeling. And Moana 2, in a respect, kind of feels a little bit like this. It's I don't know to what extent they reworked the series, but it definitely feels like, I'm not going to say the movie was a rush job, because I'm sure the television series was probably in production for a number of years before they even made this decision. And Disney is adamant that they loved what they were doing with it so much that they wanted to release it theatrically. I believe that to some extent, but I think it was probably more a money-driven thing. And I kind of feel like this movie feels like it cuts a lot of corners. The story, to me, is really quite weak, particularly when you compare it to the incredible story that was present in the first Moana movie. It was so epic and grand scale, and the characters were all so wonderful, and there was so much heart and soul in there, and really kind of intricate emotions and storytelling in that movie that I feel is kind of absent here. Moana goes on this grand quest with a few kind of newer characters, and they certainly feel like characters that were developed for a television series. Kind of like lesser characters that were developed to kind of lead a series where perhaps The Rock wasn't going to come back for every single episode because it was going to cost too much. And as a result of that, Maui actually kind of takes a little bit of a backseat in this film. There's a big stretch of movie where Maui just really doesn't appear and doesn't really do much. It's not really until kind of the second half of the movie when Maui is really involved in the plot of the film. The story just kind of feels really messy. It's like there's chunks missing. At points, the story just kind of doesn't make sense. Things kind of resolve themselves really easily. Things happen that don't really lead anywhere. Plot points are opened up that really don't go anywhere. And some of these characters just don't feel like they really serve that much of a purpose. And they're characters that I didn't really connect with on any level. The voice performers here are wonderful and they're delivering their best, but I feel like they didn't have much to work with these kind of two-dimensional television characters. And I feel like this story, this movie, just has very low stakes. Like, there's no real sense of threat in this film. Moana and these new characters and Maui are going off on this journey, but it doesn't feel like there's any kind of real threat there. And there's no kind of like real villain here either that kind of gets in the way of this mission that's at hand. There's this one character, I don't want to spoil anything, so I'll be very vague with it, but there's this one character that you kind of feel like they're working up to be a villain and then just really goes nowhere, just kind of just disappears, and that's it. As a long-form series, like this may have been like a 6 to 8 hour series that is being squished into like a 100-minute movie. I feel like there's a lot of stuff missing that we probably would have benefited from had this movie actually been released as a series. We would have got so much more. There would have been more room for these new characters to breathe and grow, and there would have been more space to tell this story that is now instead smushed into 100 minutes. And I feel like this just should have been released as a series. At the end of the day, I feel like they did a disservice to this story by releasing it as a movie, because narratively, it's just so messy and it feels like it's missing so much. It shows so much potential too, because it is a really good story that is kind of set out. Moana is sent out on this new journey by her ancestors again, her wayfinding ancestors. And it's like, it sounds like another great big epic adventure, and it just kind of, it loses its way a bit. It kind of fizzles out a little bit. I feel like had this been released as a TV series, it would have worked better. Now, I don't know how much of this they developed before they decided to turn it into a movie. I don't know how much of the animation was done. I don't know how it was segmented as episodes and whether they just kind of cut together a bunch of episodes and cut out stuff. I don't think that's what happened. I feel like they probably decided to turn this into a movie before they had done a substantial amount of animation work. I just don't know. But that said, the animation in the film is stunning. It's up to top level Disney Animation Studios animation. So they obviously decided, you know, the television staff, even the Disney Plus staff, always takes kind of a little bit of a step down in quality because they have a lower budget. You can really tell that as they have turned this into a movie, they have thrown that little extra budget in here to make that animation look a bit schmicker. This is a visually gorgeous movie, and I think that's one of the redeeming qualities, the redeeming factors of the movie. Another thing I kind of had a bit of an issue with in this movie was the music. We have new songwriters on board in Abigail Barlow and Emily Bear, who do their best to match the wonderful works of Lin-Manuel Miranda from the first movie, but just kind of really fall short on that. There's no songs in this that I say really stand out to me. There's no songs that I feel will go on to be a Disney classic. And I don't say this to rip into the songwriters because they are very talented songwriters, but I feel like they were given a bit of a bum job here. In that Lin-Manuel obviously was not attached to the TV series, probably budgetary reasons, and when they flipped it into a movie, they kept these songwriters on board. Again, very talented songwriters, but they were given this job of trying to match this masterful music from the first movie and just kind of never reached those heights. They try to imitate Lin-Manuel Miranda's works. There's a lot of rap in here, and a lot of the music just kind of feels like that same kind of beat is in there as well. But it kind of feels like an imitation of Miranda's work, and in some respect, I kind of wish that they had maybe just done a little bit of their own thing, thrown a little bit of their own flavor into it. It would have felt perhaps even more disjointed compared to the first movie, but I feel from an artist standpoint, I feel like retaining that kind of unique quality of your own voice perhaps would have been the better way to go. There's a couple of songs in here where you just feel like they're reaching and imitating that Lin-Manuel Miranda stuff, and it just never takes those heights. We do have Mark Mancina back on board doing the score, so the score very much sounds like the first movie, and it's beautiful. A lot of the same refrains and musical stings and themes come in and out of the movie. It really does ground you in that same world, and I loved that. Opataya Foa'ai is back on board as well, providing the kind of more traditional music that underscores the movie, the native Samoan music that is included here. And again, it's that beautiful through line. We get a number of the great tunes from the original movie. We know The Way is used as a refrain throughout the film, and again, it really grounds it in this same universe and makes that feel familiar and just kind of fills your heart with joy. And I think the work of Opataya and of Mark Mancina is just terrific in kind of blending the worlds between the two movies. I think the biggest takeaway here is that Disney perhaps made a very rushed and a bizarre decision in releasing something that was designed for streaming, a lower budgeted kind of lesser production, and reworking it into a theatrical film. It's a really hard thing to kind of assess. This is just such a bizarre thing. But as a final piece, as a final theatrical feature, it just doesn't reach the same heights as the original movie. And I don't think, apart from the gorgeous animation, the beautiful visuals in here, I don't think this movie really lives up to the quality that we've come to expect from Walt Disney Animation Studios. It does very much feel like, in essence, a television movie. It feels like a direct-to-video sequel that we would have got back in the 90s or 2000s. But I really do hope for a big return for this property, where we get a proper Moana story that is, you know, really properly refined as a theatrical experience from day one. I don't want to be too harsh on this one, but I am feeling really kind of let down by this, and I feel like it was a very, very silly move for Disney to do this, and I feel like it has sacrificed a bit of the movie altogether. I unfortunately will be giving Moana 2 a 2.5 out of 5. And at that, I'd love to hear from you. Have you seen Moana 2? What were your thoughts on the movie? If you haven't seen it, what are your thoughts going into the movie? As always, join the conversation down below.